Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining again. Thank you for joining today on Black and Bipolar. We have a very special guest today. And for those of you guys who are just joining us, this podcast is about managing bipolar type 2 with auditory psychosis, but it's really a link for Black women to connect and knowing that mental illness affects us all or affects a great number of us, something that we don't really talk about. And for those of you who don't know what auditory psychosis is, it's when you hear voices, sometimes sounds on a daily basis, or sometimes just by different triggers. And then from there, pretty much a roller coaster. So today, the special guest today is Miss Deed, Nieisha. Nieisha, how are you?
You got it. You got it. I'm well. I'm well. It's so great to be here on your beautiful podcast. So thank you for inviting me. I feel so honored.
Yes, no, thank you so much for joining. I was practicing in my head as I was saying everything. I'm like, I got this. I got this. Stu, Stu was very nervous. So, Nieisha, you have several different Instagrams. Can you tell people where they can find you? And
Yes. So I have a personal one. We're connected on my personal one because you're part of the family now. But the ones where your listeners, your followers can follow me if they feel so compelled is at Nieisha Speaks. For kind of a look into kind of my personal life, but not too much into my personal life. Mm-hmm. And then my business page is at Your Pure Spark. So it's spelled just kind of similar to how we have on the shirt here. I don't know if you can see it, it might be backwards. But Pure Spark, Your Pure Spark. Word, all platforms, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, I'm on there.
Okay. And for our listeners that are just listening on like Spotify, Apple, I do want to let you know the links would be in the bio so that way you can see them as well. So talk about your work. What do you do and how do you do it?
I was just trying to think about that the other day. Like, what is it that I actually do every day? Because honestly, it varies. What I used to do, it used to be very clear. I used to have a job, 9 to 5, went in there, did my job and came home. But now my world really is all things mental wellness, all things mental wellness advocacy. And that might look different, on different days. So a part of what I do is, first of all, I share my story. So I do things like this. I'll jump on different podcasts. I'll do different community events within the Massachusetts, Boston area where I talk to maybe congregations, schools, about what happened to me, my situation, and what I've learned from that.
Can you share? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And then under the Pure Spark umbrella, what I do every single Wednesday night from 7 to 8 o'clock is I host a peer support group. And our peer support groups are not like your typical peer support groups. I think I want to call it something different. But the peer support groups that I run really is focused on educating community on, kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit later about all the healing practices that are out there, because, statistics show that more and more people are going to therapy now. However, there's not as many therapists coming into the marketplace. So we're at this really unique situation where wait lists are getting longer and people need to learn and understand different forms of healing so that they can get the help that they need. So that's one of the things that we do under the Pure Spark umbrella. And also we are in the midst of creating this directory that really will help people find culturally competent healing practitioners in the Massachusetts area for now.
Yeah, that's awesome. You do a lot. I can't believe you had to think about like, what do I do? A lot. You're doing the Lord's work. Thank you. Thank you. So many people need these type of resources. I know in Columbus, Ohio, it's kind of hard to find those type of resources. So I was very happy when you reached out because a lot of people don't have access to those type of things. Like you were saying, therapists, they're getting kind of scarce out there because there's more people going to therapy, which is great. I love it. Everybody knows I'm an advocate for therapy is for everyone.
Absolutely.
But I love that we're going to be talking about that there's multiple ways that you can get help, not just therapy in the meantime while you're looking for your perfect therapist or your therapist. So what are you diagnosed with? Can you tell our listeners that?
Yeah, sure. So my diagnosis is bipolar. I don't know if it's bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 because there are obviously two forms of bipolar, and then there's all these little spring offs, and I don't even know. I just know I have bipolar, but I'm diagnosed with bipolar. But a little bit about my diagnosis is that it doesn't really quote unquote show up or cause me any real grief um, until I'm super depressed. That's when it can become really dangerous for me. So both times when I had an episode, if you will, I was suicidal. The second time in 2017, those suicidal ideations turned into attempts. So for me, I'm mostly kind of okay, unless I'm triggered, and then the depression hits, and then
Right.
it's a really dangerous place for me.
Well, I'm glad. So you have an official diagnosis?
That's correct. I was officially diagnosed in 2008. Went to the hospital, did whatever they told me to do, take this medication, go to these groups. But I was just ready to hightail up out of there without anybody knowing and get back to my quote unquote normal life because
Right.
I felt abnormal in those spaces. And then in 2017, my symptoms resurfaced because of stress, because of, working in corporate America. And so that's when I realized at that point, that second time, that, okay, wait a minute, this is something serious. This is something I probably should take care of.
Right.
Just like somebody who might be living with diabetes or someone living with high blood pressure. This is something that I actively need to make sure I pay attention to.
Right. And a lot of people, they go undiagnosed for years, even though they feel like there's something wrong. And especially, I was looking at some numbers the other day, Black women or women of color go undiagnosed for years because one, the resources aren't there. So financially, they can't go to the doctor to do these type of things. And then two, a lot of it is because of embarrassment. I know for me, it was definitely number two and a little bit of one, but number two, it was the embarrassment. If there is something wrong with me and, how am I going exactly wrong, air bunnies, and how is this going to affect my life? And do I want to know? It's like when people avoid going for checkups because if there's something wrong, I don't want to know. Just, I want to keep living the way I do.
Totally. You hit the nail on the head. I was embarrassed because everyone around me at work pretty much and my friend group seemed to be sane for all intents and purposes. They appeared to be sane, not having any struggles, any issues. So I'm like you said, what's wrong with me? I was embarrassed. I felt so ashamed of my illness or, my diagnosis or what I was going through. I didn't give myself that compassion, but now I do, but, you kind of get to that point, and you realize that once you start hearing other people's stories and you're like, oh, okay. 1 in 4 people have a diagnosis. Okay. This is okay. Got it.
And you know what kind of made me feel a little bit relieved is that it's a genetics. So more than likely the person who passed it down is one of your ancestors or, your aunt, your grandpa, grandma. So I was like, okay, someone else is going through it. They're not getting help, but someone else is going through it right now.
Totally. Actually, for me, my sister is someone who's going through it. And also I believe that there's other people in my family who don't talk about the fact that they're going through it, but they are going through it. So I saw her situation firsthand, and we both have bipolar disorder, and obviously it's a spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Everybody who's living with it, who's diagnosed with it, it's not monolithic. We don't all, operate in the same way because
Right.
we have this diagnosis. It's totally
Exactly.
different, shows up differently in everybody. But I didn't know that back in 2008.
Mhm.
And my sister had her break, I think in like 2007.
Mm.
And the stress that occurred with seeing her go through what she was going through, her situation is when she's manic, she needs to go into the hospital because she's very destructive and like,
Oh,
really dangerous. So we have like opposite,
yeah.
um, but I remember being like, oh my God, I have the same diagnosis as her. So that means I'm gonna start acting like I got scared. But then you get the education, you learn, you have a therapist, and you learn that, your diagnosis is different because you're different.
Right.
Um,
It is very like we were saying, it is very important to get that diagnosis so that way you know how to treat it. And it's not all one. Like you can't just say, bipolar is just a whole bunch of mood swings when that's not the case. Like sometimes, like for myself, with bipolar type 2, you go into a depressive stage for a longer period of time. So, and a lot of people who go through those depressive stages, they wait for that manic stage just so that way they can feel the opposite of that. And then you have those limbo stages where, you're fine. Absolutely everything is fine. Like you just feel okay, normal as whatever, that would feel to you. And then with bipolar type 2, their manic stage is a lot higher and for longer extended periods of time. So just based off of what I heard right there, it sounds like your sister and you are completely the two opposites right there.
yeah, so both the same diagnosis, but it shows up totally different. Totally
Mhm.
different. Yeah.
When you were diagnosed, how did your doctor take it? Do you think they took it serious? Do you think?
Oh my, I loved my doctor. I think I'm gonna cry right now because she was like the absolute best. I tried to find her in 2017 when I went through this second episode, but she had left the practice that she was at and I couldn't find her anywhere. And I was like, she helped me so much the first time. Like, I need to find her because I don't know what's going on with me.
Oh,
But yeah, back in 2008, when everything happened, the way that it kind of went down was she initially had prescribed me with medication for like anxiety, because those were the symptoms that were showing. So it was like,
mhm,
oh, she's anxious and she's depressed. Okay, well, we need to
mhm,
give her an antidepressant and some anxiety medicine. But if you know anything about medications, and if there's any like psychiatrists or psychologists or anyone studying clinical therapy, might know that it's kind of dangerous to give someone who has bipolar one or two depression medication, antidepressant
mhm.
medication, because it can kind of send you in different directions.
Yeah.
um, but because of all the stigma and because of my ideas on medication, the first time around, I was very, very hesitant to take the medication. So
Mhm.
because I wasn't taking anything to get better, I ended up in the hospital because of, our conversations in our therapy session. And she's like, I think you really need to go to the hospital. And I was like,
Oh man.
no, I don't want to go to the hospital. Like, that's the last place I want to be because I saw that's where my sister was.
Mhm.
And, being in the hospital is not fun, but if you gotta go, you gotta go.
Who are you telling? I was hospitalized when I lived in Kansas City, and let it it's an experience. I assume every hospital is different, but it's an experience here that, nobody ever wants to keep going through. Because if you have a staff that is not as attentive to Black people, and you have to deal with that as well, the racism in medical fields, you have to deal with that biasness. So you kind of are reluctant. I mean, I relate to you so much when it goes to reluctant to take that first pill, because you're like, something has to give. But this medicine and the stigma behind bipolar and anxiety, you're
To hear,
holding off.
yes, to get that news, the shock, and to like hear it, At first, you might have some resistance because you're like, well, the idea of what I have of someone bipolar isn't me, that's not who I think I am. But that's because society is showing us, this is bipolar and this is what it looks like, but they're not showing people that look like you and I. So that's why it's so important to have a platform like yours to really get down to the nitty gritty of what this really is, what this really looks like, in real life.
Exactly. You were talking about that, your sister had some destructive behaviors. How about for yourself? Have you ever any self-sabotage, anything that you've noticed that you did that you wish you could have done different, but because of your diagnosis, maybe that affected you without you knowing?
Definitely in 2017. I remember, so in 2008, I got the official diagnosis. I think it was, gosh, I don't even know how they determined that was the diagnosis, because I almost think that it's kind of hard to diagnose bipolar. Because especially if you're in a depressive state, people just think you're depressed. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think it's really easy to diagnose it when you're in the manic state because, they you know what I mean? They kind of but I don't really recall how I was properly diagnosed in 2008. But in 2017, when my symptoms resurfaced, I was living in a different state. So it's different doctors. They don't know my history. And they're just trying to do the best that they can to help me. So again, I was giving antidepressants, and I remember, taking them because I was like, I don't know what else to do. I'm suffering, and what do I do to get help? Okay, take these meds. And I remember when I did take the meds, I started what they call rapid cycling.
Oh yeah.
And being manic and depressed at the same time, and being really impulsive and just wanting to do stuff like drive down the road super fast. And that I think was a part of, partly due to the medication, partly due to the diagnosis of that impulse, that's associated with the mania, where you're just like, I can't even control it. I have to do this in order to feel good. And I do recall that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. With mine, I have a little, I have an extreme case of paranoia, not to the point where, I believe somebody, I always have to look over my shoulder, but paranoia, and that's due to the psychosis. But that triggers, my depressive state, it triggers my manic state. So it's kind of since I've been on the pills and since I've been doing this healing journey, it's helped me kind of manage it better. I've noticed that lately I've been experiencing long states of irritableness. So these are kind of new to me, but because people get irritated, I get irritated, but I've noticed that I've extended the normal amount of irritatedness. So I definitely hear what you're saying when you say this is something that has to get out of my system. It is happening and it just has to get out of my system.
Yeah, it's impulsive and compulsive, I guess. It's people with OCD where they feel like they have to tap. I don't know if any of the listeners have, are living with OCD, but it was kind of like that. I have to do this, even though I know this is probably not the right thing, but I just have to do this. And I thank God that no one was harmed, when this type of stuff was going on. And that, I'm not in that space anymore.
Do you feel how's your community? So your close friends, your family, how are they with your support?
I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. So when everything happened in 2008, it was mum's the word. No one knew. If anyone asked, I was on vacation. You know what I mean? My friends, they were calling. I wasn't picking up the phone. Because I was embarrassed. I was too embarrassed to tell anybody what happened. So in 2008, that was the situation. But in 2017, living in DC and most of my family living in the New England area, they kind of could sense things weren't going well for me.
Mhm.
And so I was getting like phone calls all the time from like cousins and aunts and family members, just like checking in, like constantly checking in. And it was because of them that I actually was able to go and get help. It was my sister and my cousin that actually drove down, both from Connecticut and Massachusetts, the day that I didn't pick up my phone.
Got it.
And they knew, they were like, something's up. Nieisha didn't pick up her phone. It's not a good sign. We got to go down there. We got to do an intervention. We got to go get her out of that environment. And they took me out and I went to Connecticut and I was just surrounded by love and affection. And it really, I mean, if I didn't have my community, I don't know where I would be.
That is so important. I know a lot of my listeners who have reached out, they don't have the community that they're looking for, or it's just a tough conversation. It's, what, I do have to give a shout out to the people who have the tough conversations with us. Like your community, they said, something's not right, something needs to give. And, they took action and they helped you. It is scary for someone to call out behavior in another person, especially when, you love that person, you're close to that person, you don't want to see them hurt, but you see them hurting themselves in a sense of how you were doing. It kind of hurts when you have to tell them, like, listen, this is hard truth and it's going to hurt, but you got to go forward with it. So, shout out to everyone who is watching, they're paying attention. And to the people who don't have that community, there is community out there. And I really want you to start talking about just the peer support that you have, and how that's helped people.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to make sure I clarify this. So I think that my family was uniquely qualified, because I have 3 therapists in my family.
Got it.
A doctor. So they are kind of like very sensitive to this type of stuff. And they kind of understand the warning signs and all of this stuff and then, dealing with my sister and stuff. So they kind of already knew going in, and, having these checkup calls. I think that they were all very intentional. So I think I'm very blessed in that way to have that type of support that kind of knows, that kind of understands, okay, step 1, do this, step 2, do this. Right. And if I just want to make a quick comment about that, if you are a family member to someone dealing with, whether it be bipolar or some kind of other mental illness, NAMI has a great program called Family to Family. And it's a way where you can kind of get support as a family member, because being a family member and a loved one to someone dealing with this it could be a lot, and I know from being on both sides, right? Again, I wasn't diagnosed when I was helping my sister go through her situation. So I remember being just so frustrated, like, why can't she just calm down? Like, she's doing this stuff out in the street. She's taking my car, taking my stuff, like, all this stuff. And I didn't understand it. So NAMI, does a great job with trying to provide support for family members that are going through, loving someone that's been diagnosed with a mental illness. But our peer support groups are great. I think it's tough because it's COVID and we're doing things virtually. But I tell people in the group, I try to tell them, reinforce this in the group, that we can learn from one another too. And I think that's really the value that comes with being a part of a peer support group. And there are tons of different types of peer support groups. But the fact that we both have this lived experience, right? Like, okay, fine, a doctor studied this in school. They know kind of like academically
Yeah.
But once you live through this stuff, okay,
Right.
and it's like we can both talk about different things in a
Mhm.
language in a way that others might not understand because they don't know what it's like to deal with something that you can't see, right?
Right.
You can't just put a band-aid on it.
Right.
um
I learned that a lot of my healing, I have to definitely use humor in mine. For me, you met my partner. So when I'm not doing some, let's say I'm not doing laundry or whatnot, I'm like, I can't do it. I'm not feeling like it. And they'll yell at me and they'll say, all three of you talking about my voices. Better do the laundry.
I love it.
And
Yes.
I'm like, gosh darn it, this is funny, but I'm like, gosh darn it.
I
So
love
it's humor that has to get me through it. And I like that when people have that lived in experience and you can kind of joke about it. For me, it's a healing because I feel a little bit more, air quotes again, normal. And
Mhm.
I just feel heard and seen. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can say.
Accepted, right?
Mm.
Celebrated. Like I could say to my sister, I'm like, whoop, you got out the bed and you took a shower today. Like legit, I'm proud of you. Like legit, because I know, the 3 past days might have been tough for you to get out of bed on the fourth day and say, I'm gonna take a shower and get outside. I
Mhm.
know how much work that takes, especially,
Mhm.
when you're in that depressive state.
Right.
So
It
yeah.
does take a lot. It's crippling.
Mhm.
It's like it's a physical stopping point.
Definitely. Definitely.
So how would you say that as a Black woman, how do you say that mental illness has affected your overall life? I mean, corporate America, you said you were working in. How do you think that's affected your life with anything, any aspect?
Yeah, I think that once I found out that this was a diagnosis that I was living with, and I don't know how long like when did it get engaged? You know what I mean?
Right. Hmm.
Um, but I started thinking about it and I started saying, oh, well, this kind of make a little sense because I think, there were certain occasions and certain times when I might have reacted in a certain kind of way. I too deal with short tempers and not necessarily, how do I, like my fuse sometimes can be very short.
Hmm.
And now I understand it. Now I know what to do and how to cope with it. But before, I was just like, oh my gosh, like people are getting on my nerves. But it was really me. It was really something that I was dealing with and coping with. So I think for so long, I was just trying to like look around me, see how everyone else was acting and kind of mirror that. Right.
Okay.
Um, but now it's like, I'm me. Right. Um, there are things that kind of are unique to who I am.
Hmm.
And I accept all parts of that, and that's okay. Um, I think that being a Black woman and being open and honest about my diagnosis initially was hard because I didn't see a lot of people talking about it. But then
Mm-mm.
when I opened up about it, there's like a floodgate of people like me too, I'm dealing with this. And this comes from people who are in corporate, people with regular jobs, whoever, like.
Mhm.
And then once I became able to like normalize it in that way, I just said, you know what, like this is actually a part of a lot of people's lives, we're just not talking about it.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that. You open up the floodgates and you just see people left and right. And I did not expect the podcast to get so many people reaching out and saying, this also happens with me. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. Like, this is great because, people are also experiencing this as well. So, how would you like to talk to, we're wrapping up here a little bit. Is there anything else you want to share to the followers?
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you again for creating this space because you are creating a new community. When I posted about this on social media, I posted about it on Facebook and LinkedIn. It got a lot of shares. It got a lot of eyes. It got a lot of attention. One person who I actually know that lives in Boston, who is Black and also lives with bipolar disorder, was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. Do you know any other, Black women that, so she was just like super excited that someone actually called out this specific category. Because I don't know if it's ever really been called out this way before.
Mm-hmm.
So she's just super excited. So thank you so much for just being able to open up and speak honestly about this, because the work that you're doing is amazing and it's helping to heal a lot of people. And we didn't really talk about the different forms of healing. We didn't really get there just yet. I can always come back on, but just high level. Obviously there's therapy, obviously there's medication. And those things were very important to me, especially when I couldn't do anything. You know what I mean? I needed to take medication. I needed to go to talk to someone.
I think we should definitely do a part 2.
Sure. Let's do part 2.
I think so as well, because I'm looking at the outline guide and I'm like, God, I had so many questions. We're not even halfway done my questions.
That's okay, because you got into the story,
I did. You're such a good storyteller. I love it. And I just love your journey, and I love how you express yourself. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. And I enjoy doing this. This is actually why a part of what I'm trying to do is do more of this, more of speaking. I think because deep down inside, I kind of wanted to be an entertainer in my life at some point in time. And since, I'm not really a singer or a dancer, this is the way that I can entertain people in a sense and educate them by sharing my story and my perspective on mental health. So
I love it. I love it so much. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and please be on the lookout for part 2, because I still have outline to talk about.
Totally fine.
So please join us for part 2. Of course, we have to make this happen because such a beautiful guest has come on today and talks so openly about their life. It's absolutely beautiful. And again, you can follow Miss Deed on the social media links that I will have in the bio. You can also find it on my website at blackandbipolarpodcast.com. I always have to think, did I add podcast or no?
It's new.
So please, everybody, like, subscribe, and share. And of course, you can always donate. This podcast is done freely, but we still have bills to manage and medical expenses, because medicine is expensive. All right. Well, that is it for today. Thank you all. You have a great night.
Bye.